Hello and welcome back to a brand new DNF1 F1 podcast. I hope that you're all doing well and thank you as always for being here. It's great to have you along for a bit of F1 chat and discussion, and in this episode we are going to be previewing the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. That's right, we are in race 2 of the F1 2024 World Championship, and there were plenty of lessons that we learned from the Bahrain Grand Prix, and I'm pretty certain that we are going to learn many, many more. But of course, the ever prolonged question, I suppose, that we should be asking ourselves right now is who can catch Max Verstappen and Red Bull? We're going to get into all of that and all the possible contenders for that this weekend. And joining me as always, we have Lee Wallington on the panel. Lee, first of all, hope you're doing well, mate. And are you looking forward to the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix?
Firstly, I'm good. Thank you for asking. Obviously, I hope you are as well. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I mean, there was a lot of caveats that could have been added to last weekend's race regarding the competition outside of Red Bull. So it'd be interesting to see if the caveats carry over, i.e. the Ferrari's brakes issues, or more specifically Charles, Mercedes engine issues, and things like that. Let's just see if it carries over and see if there's a more true representation. Obviously, some of the teams feel they're closer to Red Bull. Some feel that Red Bull, this is Red Bull for the season, there is no closer gap. So it's really nice to get into the second race and really hopefully see a clearer picture of where the lay of the F1 land is right now.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't paint a picture of what the 2024 World Championship is going to look like after one race. I mean, we joked about this last year and you could have very much done it after one practice session, but I think what we saw in Bahrain was an indicator that there is more to come from some of the challenging teams. Now, whether that will be enough to challenge Red Bull, we'll have to wait and see, but it's certainly not a situation right now where some people have kind of given up or felt like we need to just bin off 24 and focus on 25. It's certainly not like that at all. So we'll have to wait and see, but there's plenty to talk about in this episode and we're going to get straight into that. But before we do, of course, the first thing that we need to do is pay tribute to a 5-star review. Now, this season, guys, I've been asking for you to give us some 5-star reviews to support the show, and it's really helped us out a lot. So please do keep them coming. And as a reward for your patronage, we are paying tribute to one of you lucky lot per every single episode if you leave us a 5-star review. So make sure to do that on Apple Podcasts, leave a written one as well, which we read out. And of course, don't forget to leave one on Spotify if you listen to this show on Spotify as well. So today's 5-star review goes to Jeff H. And Jeff writes that it's his favourite F1 podcast. I'm a relatively new F1 fan from the States, tried a lot of different podcasts, and this one is simply the best. Great insights, takes, and explanations on everything F1. The format, questions, and discussions are superbly presented, interesting and entertaining. It's like listening to a great conversation with fellow fanatics. Kudos as well for covering the sport without hitting us over the head with politics. Sorry, Jeff, this one's going to involve some politics in it. But I love the show and I will continue to follow and support you guys on YouTube and on my favourite podcasting platform. Thank you so much, Jeff. I really appreciate that. And once again, another lovely review with some really nice words. And it makes it all worthwhile when we do this show to hear the thoughts of you guys that listen to this show, wherever it is around the world that you're listening to, whether it be in the States or in the UK or different parts of Europe or even in Africa. We've had a few reviews from there, which was quite amazing to see that we have quite a bit of reach out there. But it's always great to hear from all of you guys and keep them coming. We read them out on this show. So if you want to read out on the show, leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcasting platform. Of course, if you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel as well. So the first thing, Lee, that we need to talk about on this episode is, unfortunately, contrary to what Jeff likes about this show, is the fact that we do have to talk about the political side, or at least the off-track saga that's still developing at this point. Now, just to recap anybody that has been living under a rock at the moment, I'm obviously referring to the Christian Horner saga, where obviously there was an investigation that went on over his conduct in the workplace with a female colleague. He had been cleared by this investigation after that was announced on, what was it, the Thursday or Friday before the Bahrain Grand Prix. I believe it was on the Thursday.
I think it was Wednesday it was announced.
Yeah, an email had come out following that with some leaked information, And this information contained screenshots of WhatsApp messages between Christian and this other person. Of course, this is all alleged. This isn't proved or verified at this point in time. And of course, some pictures as well. Now, we're not going to comment on that again because we talked about that in the Bahrain review when we talked about that particular piece of information. But there have also been some words spoken by Max Verstappen's father, Jos Verstappen, who has said that the team would explode if Christian Horner would stay in charge. There was a rumoured row or argument between the two, and now the news is coming out following these comments that Jos Verstappen will not be attending the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. According to ESPN, Nate Saunders, F1, I think, put the tweet out originally on this news. Now, I don't want to speculate on where Jos is. I'd heard rumours that he's meant to be attending a race in Belgium. I don't know if that's true or not, or maybe he's decided to duck this race altogether. But once again, Lee, F1 is really being plagued right now by this current predicament that it faces with all the stuff off track, centred around Red Bull and in particular Christian Horner. Obviously, there's been other people that have been getting involved in this. Even Mohammed Ben Sulayem, the FIA president, has been getting involved, trying to talk to Max Verstappen about this. It's the last thing F1 really needs to be focusing on at this point in time. We should be gearing up and be excited about a new world championship. And even after the first race and all the excitement, there was this, how can I put it, this lukewarm, tepid, disappointed feeling that we just wanted to watch the races, but we couldn't really enjoy it because of everything that was going on in the background.
Yeah, it really is a distraction from actually the sport. Where at the end of the day, yes, as fans, you enjoy some of the off-track action, but that's off-track action such as silly season and things like that, not about sexual harassment cases or teams imploding. At the end of the day, we want to see the racing, and that's this whole event is distracting from that and the championship that we could have. Obviously, there's loads of rumors about what's going on at the moment, which obviously not going to divulge in this. I think there's some wishful thinking as well regarding where drivers may move, which may happen if those rumors happen to be true. But it's the sport really could do without it. There's a lot of bad publicity already caused, especially with the Red Bull brand. And it's probably going to get a lot worse for Red Bull as a brand. Then it'll get better, and that's going to have impact on Formula One as well.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the story regarding the leaks and when that came out, obviously that followed the conclusion of the investigation, which deemed that Christian Horner was innocent of the charges that he was alleged or accused to have done. And whoever this person is that put that leak out obviously didn't want to let this go. They obviously wanted to try and discredit Christian, and tarnish his reputation, maybe to a point which forces Red Bull to try and get rid of him because they just don't want the bad publicity or even more damage to their reputation. At this point in time, as far as we're aware, that's not going to change anything at this point in time. Things could change all the time at the moment. It's just literally go on social media and within 5 minutes a new story has come about. But for me, Lee, as an F1 fan, I'm really starting to get quite frustrated about all of this because, yes, they are important things that are going on. Yes, the investigation into, the Christian's conduct in the workplace, obviously that was a very important thing. And, if the other person involved wants to follow up on this, then I'm sure there are avenues they can go down to do that. But in terms of what's now happening, it's evolved beyond that. And it's basically just a huge power struggle at Red Bull. At least that's how I see it. And unfortunately, it's really becoming quite toxic in the sport. And I think a lot of people on social media have expressed their discontent for this. We all just want to watch the cars and our favourite drivers compete at the highest level of motorsport and just enjoy the action. We don't want to focus on any of this stuff that's going on.
No, we don't want to focus on this. We want obviously Red Bull fans may disagree, but from a general fan, you want obviously racing. You want to see a competition. Obviously, the race results being mixed up or unpredictable would also probably be enjoyable as well. But we want to see these 20 brilliant drivers who are athletes in their own right, the peak of their prowess. And we have to remember these are 20 drivers best in the world because you don't get to Formula One by being completely rubbish. I say completely because there has been some rubbish drivers that have made Formula One. But it's really the pinnacle of the motorsport, and we should be enjoying it for what it is supposed to deliver, than more about this political implosion that seems to be going on in Red Bull in slow motion, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's not even just them. I mean, I do feel for some Red Bull fans in this regard, or all Red Bull fans actually, because no matter how you feel about what the team is doing or the current position, you can't even really enjoy it, because I feel like on social media, Red Bull fans are probably subject to critique, or not necessarily abuse, but banter and teasing at their expense because of what's going on off track. And it's like, well, they don't really, they don't influence none of this. They're just supporting their team in the same way that I would support Ferrari, or other people would support Mercedes or other teams. And it's like, just because of the actions that are going on a political level, it's not great for F1. Of course it's not. But it's no reason to really, tease them at their expense over it. They just want to enjoy the sport as much as the rest of us do. So I do sympathise with them in that regard. We did get a question on this one. Funny enough, our other panellist, Courtney Pine, who's not with us at the moment, he asked if F1 is losing credibility given the scandals that are becoming public knowledge. I don't think, credibility in what regard is probably the first thing I would ask, but I think as a trusted organisation, I don't think F1 is losing credibility. I think, unfortunately, there are people within the sport at this point in time are damaging its reputation and are putting quite a bad look on the sport at this point in time. I mean, there are other stories coming out about the FIA president, Mohammed Ben Sulayem, and his involvement in the Singapore Grand Prix last year, where there was a story going around saying he was potentially influencing the stewards to overturn the decision that Fernando Alonso had received a penalty from. We all remember that, the decision where he received an additional penalty, a time penalty that was, because one of the mechanics touched the car, or the rear of the car, whilst he was serving a time penalty already, so he got an additional one, which prevented him getting a podium. But then, of course, that was overturned post-race, which allowed him to take the podium. And now there's another story from the BBC suggesting that he wanted to, he asked for the Las Vegas Grand Prix to not be... I'm just looking for the word here.
It was going to be given the license.
Yeah, that's right. He allegedly told officials not to certify the Las Vegas Grand Prix to host the race. So all of this that's going on, it's very much detracting from the sport element and the racing, which is what we want to see. I don't care about half the politics that goes on, quite frankly. I wish that just existed outside the sport, but unfortunately it's come front and centre, and we're at this point, Lee, where we're doing this podcast today on Tuesday. By the time it goes out on Thursday, there's probably more developments and more stories that would have come out by then that we haven't even covered yet.
Oh yeah, completely. This is both stories are going to be a rapidly changing scenario until there is a defined outcome. Obviously, with Christian, Red Bull believe the internal investigation will be the last of it, which it hasn't been the case. And obviously, the FIA investigation, Ben Sulayem, that's still going through the internal affairs review, according to the article. So you have to wait and see the outcome of their investigation to see if there's anything substantial to that apparent leak. But it's just gonna just slow motion car crash, unfortunately, and using the analogy of Formula One with the car crash.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. But look, let's move on and talk about the racing itself, because I'm sure a lot of people listening to this show are more interested in us talking about the racing and the drivers and the cars rather than the politics off track. So, Jeff, if you are listening, this is the part of the show you're going to enjoy, I'd imagine. First thing first, we have to talk about Red Bull, Lee. On track, not off it, of course. Max Verstappen dominating the Bahrain Grand Prix from start to finish. Another Grand Slam to his name. Bahrain does quite often exacerbate the strengths of certain cars more than others. I think Red Bull certainly fits into that category. So with that in mind and all the issues that the other teams were having, should we expect them to have it as easy this weekend, or can we rely on the chasing pack to try and make more of a fight of it this weekend?
So I do want to add, and I said it in the review, but I'm going to repeat it again, that all the teams had 5 days to dial in the car for the Bahrain Grand Prix, including the testing and practice. They had all that time and all that data gathering to find the perfect setup. And we know Red Bull are generally quite good at finding the perfect setup. And as you said, the Red Bull car seems to really suit the Bahrain track. It's more so compared to Saudi. But I also think there's a lot of lessons learned from the competition about what went wrong. Obviously, Mercedes said their engine issues were caused by being too restrictive on their cooling package. They went too aggressive, and that obviously cost them engine performance. And Ferrari obviously identified their brake issues and what caused the brake issues. So if they've identified the root cause of those two issues and just those two teams alone, then obviously that means there's a chance of they not repeating their mistake this weekend, which means they're getting performance. Because I think both Mercedes and Ferrari said they were losing about half a second a lap. And if that is the case, the finishing gap wouldn't have been as big to the Ferrari and Mercedes at the end if they were getting that every lap throughout the weekend. So I think there's a very good chance to have a closer race this weekend. I'm not saying Max may have a fight for the win, just the gap may be closer.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, this was part of one of the questions that we got in. And of course, as part of our episodes this season, we are going to engage and answer some of the questions that you send to us. And you can do that on the Twitter page when we put the tweet out asking for questions. Just get to us at DNF1_official, get your questions in, and we'll answer them on the show. And this ties in with the first question I wanted to ask Lee. And this was from our friend, Mr_Jabba. Again, I think I've pronounced that right. You'll have to let me know. If you are listening to this, mate, you'll have to let us know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And he was asking, can we rely on any data from the previous race to picture what to expect in Saudi Arabia? I think the short answer is not much at this point. Because as you pointed out, Lee, that we had a lot of testing, we had some practice, we had a race, we had 5 days worth of running, if not more than that actually, to paint a picture of what to expect in Bahrain. We're not going to get that in Jeddah, and it's a different circuit, different characteristics. We know some teams are stronger at Jeddah than they are at Bahrain. We know some teams have already had problems. We already talked about Ferrari and Mercedes. So I'm imagining that there's going to be a different picture here. In terms of the pecking order, I don't think I would be too amiss from predicting something similar in terms of where the teams stack up at this point. I just think the most important thing to remember is that the gap and the advantage that Max Verstappen had, I'd be very surprised if he wins the race without pushing by almost half a minute like he did last weekend.
Yeah, I was going to say on the data, I think we can at least ascertain which is the fastest team for Saudi Arabia, which will carry over, and the slowest team for Saudi Arabia. I don't see much difference in those two positions, unfortunately, for especially more for Alpine than Red Bull. But they do think the gap will be close, as I said. The positioning of the chasing pack may also change. I think that will fluctuate quite heavily as we go to circuit dependence, using Mercedes and Ferrari again as an example. They may change. One circuit suits them better than the other, and they, instead of going set Ferrari second best, they may go to third best. The Mercedes jump. That will ebb and flow out the season. And at least, not forget, McLaren and Aston Martin are in that pack as well. So they could easily be up and down. So I reckon that it's definitely going to be entertaining battle behind Max.
Yeah, I think so. To what extent the challenge will be to them, we'll have to wait and see. I mean, look, we said this last week, and we have to compliment Red Bull in this regard, that on top of building a very, very quick car, they've built one which is obviously reliable from the looks of it, and one that they don't have to try too hard to get the most out of. Ferrari and Mercedes ran into some problems. You already mentioned Mercedes having the bodywork issue, which apparently cost them 6-7 tenths of a second per lap. Ferrari had a very similar delta issue with their time that they lost regarding to some brake problems. And of course, both Leclerc and Sainz did have that to differing degrees. So the long and the short of it is, as far as those three teams are concerned, Ferrari and Mercedes should be closer to Red Bull in Jeddah than they were in Bahrain. assuming that they both have clean races, there are no problems, they can push as fast as they can go, they should be closer. Whether that will be enough to challenge Red Bull remains to be seen. I think Charles Leclerc was saying that, if he didn't have the brake issue, he thinks he could have been in P2. Maybe challenge Max. I'm not sure how realistic that is. I think I believe him when he says he could have been P2. I think he could have got Perez, but we don't know how hard Perez was pushing, because when Perez had the softs on, do you remember, Lee? We had signs going, let me know when the softs are going to go off, when are the softs going to go off? And at the point Ferrari thought Perez's softs was going to go off, he started setting faster lap times. So there's more there for Red Bull to unlock. I'm pretty sure Max would have been on some sort of a leash where he wouldn't have been exceeding a certain lap time. And we saw last time out when GP was telling him to, slow down a bit and curb his pace, Max was trying to set time 6-7 tenths faster than he should have done. So we know there's more pace to come from them, but I expect it to be a little bit closer than it was.
Yeah, I completely agree on that.
So let's move on to the next question. And again, another one regarding Red Bull on this one. Just looking for it here. I have them scattered all over the place. Here we go. So this one's from HammerTime44. And HammerTime44 writes, is F1 now at serious risk of losing fans owing to the current domination that we are witnessing more than ever before? If so, should the FIA or F1 step in and make rule changes to improve the racing at the front and try to stop Red Bull or Max Verstappen from winning every single race and championship? I'm going to let you tackle that one, Lee. What do you reckon?
To the first part of the question, I think it's very likely that Formula One is losing viewership, followers, attendees, whichever category of fan you want to put on the Formula One as a whole. It's losing it. Obviously, there was surveys last year. There were social media surveys. There was television numbers that they were all down last year. And if a period of heavily Max domination occurs again this year, I mean, winning all but one race, for example, just going to put that, that's what he did Red Bull did, but not him in particular. Red Bull win all but one race again this year. That will probably have another impact on what was already lower numbers from last year. So, yeah, of course, numbers will go down. However, FIA doing a rule change to impact Red Bull, apart from, personally, I don't think it's the most sporting thing to do. Red Bull done a brilliant job to build a brilliant car, and you shouldn't take that away from them. There's also a track record, not just Red Bull, but other teams, when they have the advantage and you change a rule to impact the team with the advantage, they're the best placed team to mitigate the rule change, and you end up just hurting the competition trying to chase them. Use an example of, obviously, 22. They did the rule change after the summer break regarding the floor edges, and Ferrari went from being the second best team, really fighting Red Bull, to completely dropping off of Red Bull's pace altogether, because Red Bull could mitigate the changes, and Ferrari were in a worse off position because the car just wasn't as complete beforehand. And you have to think of when they've tried to impact Mercedes in the past, who remained the fastest car after they FIA tried to change the rules to impact Mercedes. I think it was 2017 they changed the rules, and Mercedes was still the best placed team because they were the ones that had the better car that they could understand and develop the car. So making rule changes, or mid-season rule changes especially, I think it ends up making the whole product, so to speak, a Formula One product, the racing, worse, and the gaps even larger than they probably are before any potential change.
Yeah, I mean, in answer to that first part of the question, I absolutely agree. I think in terms of the casual fan, F1 is certainly seeing a decline of interest from those particular sets of fans, because a lot of them would have come in 2021. They would have seen how exciting that was. Okay, it was on the limit of what was bearable at times because of how that all went down off the track more than on it. But it was exciting, and a lot of fans came into the sport on the back of that. Of course, Drive to Survive played its role as well over the last few years. But I wouldn't be surprised in hearing a lot of casual fans that went in the sport, came to the sport because of that, are now leaving the sport because they're bored of not necessarily the same guy winning every single race and winning championship after championship, but it's the same old story. We try to sell it to people, not us personally. F1 tries to sell it to people as, it's the greatest show on earth. anybody can, win. Realistically speaking, we know that's not true. But, under a meritocracy, the idea is that the best team that performs the best will win. And that's not necessarily always the same team. But in an era like this, where that is the case, it does get harder and harder to try and sell this product and say, oh yeah, it's exciting. You don't know what's going to happen. Chances are you do. We joked about this throughout the winter, and then Max Verstappen goes and does exactly what we joked he would do, all the while hoping that wasn't going to be the case. So I'm not surprised that people feel that way. I don't blame them for feeling that way, to be honest. No one should be forced to subscribe to something that they're not getting joy out of. In terms of the second part of that question, I 100% categorically do not like when the FIA and F1 try to step in and make rule changes, either a certain phase into a technical era, if you like. I don't like it when they do that. I certainly don't like it when they do it mid-season, and with the attempt of trying to slow the leading team down to try and, make the show more exciting. Because whether people like this or not, F1 is a meritocracy. As I've already said, the best team that does the best job should win, regardless of whether people like it or not. And people won't like me saying this, but Max Verstappen right now is the best driver in Formula One. He's been that way for a while now. Red Bull are the best team in Formula One. They've got the best people. They do the best job. They should win. And I don't like the idea of teams that are in that position, whether that was Red Bull now or Mercedes before them when they were so successful and all these people were lobbying for the same thing. I mean, the amount of times that Christian Horner said, oh, we need to change F1. We need to try and, change the rules to stop Mercedes dominance. Mercedes saying the same thing about Red Bull, or all the times Ferrari were dominating, or McLaren or Williams. You can just change the team name and change the people complaining. It always comes full circle. So I don't like it when that happens. And as I said, ultimately what we're talking about here, Lee, is a sport where in the last few years, the reason Red Bull are dominating to the degree that they are is because they were the only team that got this rule set right. The other 9 got it wrong. So why should we punish Red Bull when everyone else needs to pull their finger out and figure this out? For me, I think it's a no-brainer. I don't think it's fair at all.
Yeah, completely. I don't think it's fair. If you can try it and change up the sport, obviously you can make drastic things. I know I joked in the review on the last episode about you just change the rule that Max always has to start last. Max will probably still win, but it'll be entertaining coming through the field.
Yeah,
they won't stop him winning, but it'll make it an entertaining product. But it's even that as a joke. I don't think is something that should be seriously contended because it's supposed to be a sport and it's fair competition. Yes, as you said, it's meritocracy and best team will win, but it shouldn't be victimizing that success or targeting that success, I should say.
Yeah, no, of course. It's just got an idea, actually. I'm going to task our listeners and, of course, our viewers, if you're watching this on YouTube as well. Let us know. You can either message us on our socials or get in the comment section on YouTube. I'm going to task you guys to come up with the most fun or the funniest way in which you can stop Max Verstappen from winning another Grand Prix in Formula One. Just how to stop Max Verstappen dominance. Obviously, don't take it too seriously. We're just going to come up with some jokey stuff. Try and keep it PG if you can, please. I think that's probably my only criteria for an option there. But let me know, how would you stop Max Verstappen from dominating Formula One at this point in time? And I'll read out some of the best ones on the review show this weekend. How about that? So, get cracking, guys. Let's see what you can come up with that will amuse us. But yeah, as we said already, I don't think we need to gloss over it anymore or talk about it anymore. I'm not the biggest fan of those kind of changes, never have been, and they're always a short fix. And sometimes, as you pointed out, Lee, like Mercedes in the past, they tried doing it so many times. Eventually, they got there, but Mercedes used to come up with different solutions all the time and say, well, beat that. So, let's move on to the next question. The next one we got was from Harrison, HVRR1SON, and he asked, how nervous was Adam when Sainz outbraked Leclerc into Turn 1 in Bahrain? And an additional question, what is your current order for the teams based on your performance you saw in Bahrain? Well, Harrison, in answer to your question, I kind of half answered this on social media. Let's just say I almost needed a different pair of underwear when I saw that. So, yeah, we'll move on from that one. Current order based on the teams we saw or perform the pecking. I think he's asking what the pecking order is. I think it's similar to what we said in testing, wasn't it, Lee? I mean, I had Red Bull, obviously, number 1, Ferrari, number 2, Mercedes, number 3, McLaren, number 4, Aston Martin, 5. I still have RB as 6. I think they underperformed in that race. And then after that, I would say, I think Haas, or maybe not Haas. I think say Stake, probably 7th. Then Haas, then Williams, and then Alpine. I think based on what we saw in Bahrain, those only changes I would make is at the back of the field, but the top 5 or 6 were pretty much as we expected.
Yeah, the only one you can maybe argue is that RB and Stake or Sauber is interchangeable on that. But yeah, obviously compared to the biggest surprise compared to our before season predictions is obviously Alpine and how bad they were. And obviously I said they were the slowest, but you got that one wrong.
Do you know what? It's funny because I remember when we did the predictions video for 2024 and I was differing over picking Alpine to be my flop of the season and I didn't. Mostly because it was driven out of rage for them flopping so badly compared to what I expected of them in 2023. And I thought, no, I'm going to go the other way. For some reason, I wanted to try and go viral and say Mercedes, and I'm already regretting that decision already. So, yeah, I guess karma is probably the word for it on my part. Whether that would have saved Alpine if I'd have predicted them to be a flop, I doubt it because they look pretty abysmal anyway. But for some reason, I didn't go with it.
Yeah, well, it was only a pre-season prediction. What can we say?
Yeah. Might be missing out on the Goatee award this year, but at least I didn't have to do a forfeit, eh? So that's something at least. Okay, next question we got was from MercFan6344, and they write, "Hi guys, enjoy the show. Thank you very much. Should Mercedes focus their attention on maximising George Russell's performances in 2024, given Lewis Hamilton will be joining Ferrari in 2025, and in the past few races, George has been outperforming Lewis? What are your thoughts?" I think that's a good question, Lee. I mean, George, to be fair, it wasn't just Bahrain. In the last few races of last season, George was the lead Mercedes driver. He had upped his game. Now, maybe this was because Lewis might have switched off because he thought P2 might have been possible, but that started to get away when Perez upped his form again. But in terms of whether that Mercedes should focus their attention on maximising George's performances over Lewis, no, I don't see the point in that, to be honest, because Mercedes are going to be competitive in the Constructors. At minimum, they'll want to consolidate the P2 that they had last season, although they'll be hoping to try and do a bit more than that this year and get closer to Red Bull. So I don't really see the point in trying to give George all that preferential treatment over Lewis just because Lewis is going to Ferrari. I think one thing that Mercedes will start doing, and this will happen a lot more as the season goes on, is those meetings where they'll ask for driver feedback and input that relates to what they're going to do for next year's car. You'll start to see that Lewis will slowly be uninvited to those meetings, whereas George Russell will obviously be the centre of attention. I can see that happening. But in terms of prioritising performance, I don't see the logic in giving George all that treatment and Lewis absolutely nothing, because you need both your cars.
Yeah, I completely agree. We know Lewis can have off periods when he's not feeling the car, he's not feeling happy, or there's other distractions. And there's no need for Mercedes to fabricate a off period for Lewis because, as you said, they need all the points they can get for the constructors. So there's really no point having that kind of impact on Lewis, although he's still technically their main driver. George can obviously take it to him, and Lewis can take the back to George. But I completely agree with what you said there, Adam.
Yeah, as I said before, I actually think Lewis probably needs a little bit more, not necessarily love at Mercedes right now, because I don't think that's an issue. I think it's more, then, George has really got to grips with this car quite quickly. And I think for Lewis, what we saw in Bahrain suggests that there is still a few teething issues he needs to iron out before he can really not only match George, but really become a force. Because Mercedes this season, obviously their target is Red Bull. But I think it's fair to say that towards the back end of last season, they were a bit behind Ferrari in terms of performance. They might have beat them in the constructors, but I think if you wanted to lay the pecking order as to who had the fastest car at the end of 2023, I think Ferrari were ahead of Mercedes, and I still think they're there now. So Mercedes can't ignore that, and that's also going to be quite important for them given that Lewis is going over to Ferrari. So I think it's important for them to try and make sure that he is doing the absolute most he can as soon as possible so that they don't face a big deficit that they'll have to overcome like they did in 2023. So we'll see. But right now, I don't see the value in prioritising George Russell over Lewis Hamilton at this point in time. I think that will come eventually, but I don't see why they would do it now, to be honest. Let's move on to the next question from Magic Alonso 14. Love that name. And they write, will Aston Martin and McLaren be concerned regarding how far they seem to be off the pace during the race in Bahrain? Maybe this is more of a question for Aston Martin, but it seems that they were in their own race and a long way off Red Bull, Ferrari, and even Mercedes. I think we need to break that down into two parts, Lee. Let's start with McLaren on this one, because I understand the question is focused more towards Aston Martin, and I agree with that. But McLaren were quite open throughout the entire weekend that despite the expectations that we had for them in Bahrain, I think it's probably fair to say that they didn't live up to those expectations, and then they started to come out and quietly admit that they're not quite where they want to be. Not necessarily missing targets, but they are on the back foot compared to the likes of Ferrari and Mercedes, and obviously they are going to try and overhaul that to make similar gains to what they did last season.
Yeah, apart from where the car's not where they want to be, they always said the Bahrain circuit doesn't suit their car. Like we were saying earlier, that Bahrain suits Red Bull. McLaren, even through testing, they're like, this car does not go well with this circuit. It doesn't like the circuit. So they were quite open about that. So I still think they also made a good step compared to last year where they were last in qualifying. So they've made definitely progress year on year from Bahrain 23 to Bahrain 24. And I think one of the things that Zach Brown said is one of their big targets for this year is to be able to bring upgrades to the McLaren at every race weekend. If they do that, is a different matter, but it's a good objective to have. Means obviously their car performance will potentially change race in, race out. So they may be not as where they expected to be in Bahrain, but they could be in a slightly better position in Saudi Arabia. They could be slightly better. And we all know that there's no golden bullet. McLaren had a golden bullet last year. So they've done it once. They may find something that works again for them. Not saying it will, but they will solidly dial in that McLaren performance. Then I think they will definitely close the gap to Ferrari and Mercedes. Obviously, McLaren did have, especially more with Lando, had the issues with the battery in the ICU he changed, or was it the energy store?
It was along the ICE that you had to change.
So he had those engine issues which potentially affected the gear ratios and performance from the engine. Merely that was just Lando, but they had their own issues last time out that could have impacted their performance. That they may be in a better position, and even going into Saudi Arabia, McLaren have said that their car should suit their circuit. They went really strong compared to their relative performance last year in Saudi Arabia. So I think it's not over for McLaren. They'll answer the first part of the question regarding to McLaren.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you. McLaren don't go well at Bahrain at all. So anybody that was expecting McLaren to be really up there at the front, I think that would have been a bit of wishful thinking. Qualifying wise, I think there's a good case to argue that Lando should have been at least on one of the front two rows. He didn't quite nail his qualifying lap, which unfortunately for Lando has been quite an issue for him, and he still struggles to get right. It's not the first time where he looks like he might have the pace and then he misses a braking point, or he doesn't quite get the exit right and he loses a few temps. And unfortunately now, 3.5 temps can be the difference between being on pole and being in 6th. So, that is quite a gap when you've got a lot of teams and drivers around you that have a reasonably similar level of performance. So qualifying is proving to be more critical now than it ever has been. I don't think McLaren are going to worry too much. I think they know what they're about. I think they can be trusted to, make some gains where they need to. And hopefully in the next few races, we'll get a better representation. In terms of the representation part or the pecking order, I think this applies to all the teams. I think it's fair to say we're not really going to get a real true understanding of what the actual true pecking order is, despite the fact that we've predicted it already and tried to confirm it already a few times. We're not going to get an accurate picture until after Japan. I think once we've gone to the Japanese Grand Prix and seen how everybody fares, then I think that's where we have our established pecking order, with the exception of Red Bull and Alpine. I think everybody else in between, other than those two teams, it's not 100% certain where they stack up quite yet. So I wouldn't worry too much. Aston Martin, on the other hand, eventually we get to them, that's a different story, because Fernando Alonso did a phenomenal job in qualifying in that Aston Martin to get it right up there. But in the race, it just went backwards. And ultimately, I think he was right in saying that they were practically in their own race. They weren't competing with anybody ahead of them, and they were a long way ahead of those behind them. And that proved true, because Lance Stroll had his problems on lap 1, got caught up in that incident with Hulkenberg, and which wasn't his fault, of course, and he still managed to get up to the top 10 quite easily behind his teammates. So they're in a bit of a different situation where they are definitely going to be searching for answers, because they are a long way off where they would hope they would be, especially compared to where they were last season.
Yeah, I said last year a lot about Alpine Land, that they were in the race of their own. Although Aston Martin are, we consider, in the chasing pack, they seem to be landed in their own equivalent of Alpine Land, and what I'm going to call is Aston Martin world. And it just seems to be they're ahead of the back 5 teams, and although they're part of the chasing pack, there is a gap between them and McLaren, a bigger gap between Mercedes and Ferrari, and even to Red Bull. It's really not the step performance that they expected coming into this winter. Yet they may dial in the car a bit more and bring some upgrades, but something has gone amiss of their plan, and they've not found the performance gain that they thought they would have had coming into this season, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you. Plenty of answers for Alpine, not for Alpine, well, they do have to find as well, but for Aston Martin to find. Alpine, well, they need to they need to ask the right questions, let alone find the right answers to that. Let's move on to the final question that I'm going to do before we do our predictions, Lee. And this one is from Steph Krasinski. Hi, Steph. She writes, following the Bahrain Grand Prix, there seems to be a lot of comparisons between where Alpine started 2024 and where McLaren started 2023. Can you see Alpine being able to develop their way back up the pecking order in the same way McLaren did in 2023? In a word, no.
Yeah, I would agree.
No, I don't. I mean, I do need to elaborate on this, I'm sure. No, I don't. And I think the simple way of putting it, Steph, and for anyone else that's curious about Alpine and the comparison with McLaren here, is McLaren recognised very early on, even before the season last year, before they launched their car, they knew it was a dud. They knew they were going the wrong way on the concept. They made a huge change to their technical structure. Andrea Stella was brought in. Obviously, they brought in Rob Marshall and David Sanchez, who obviously weren't able to start with them, but they were making changes there. They binned off their old car concept. They started again. They went with what they'd learned, and they built a very good car, which we only got to see the full version of it at British Grand Prix. And look what they were able to achieve. Almost a double podium, second and third on the grid. And they were so much better for it. And I think the difference between that and what Alpine are in right now is Alpine, they don't even have a clue at this point in time. With all due respect to the amazing men and women that do so much great work at Enstone, the senior management and the upper echelons within that team don't seem to have a clue. They missed their aero targets. The car is overweight. It's probably one of the ugliest cars on the grid, and I imagine it's probably going to be stripped of even more paint to try and save weight, which is going to make things even worse here. The only good thing they've got going for them are the drivers. So I just don't trust Alpine at all to get this right in 2024. I think this is a sign of things to come. I think they're obviously in the worst position of any team right now, and the difference between them and everyone else is everybody has a plan of how to go forward. They don't. And that's the worrying part. I mean, just looking at the people that they've let go. They've let go of their team principal. They've lost their CEO. They lost their sporting director. They lost their racing director, chief technical officer. another technical director, head of aerodynamics. This all happened in the last 8 months. That is not the sign of a team, in my opinion, that has the credentials or the capability or even the idea of how to move forward at this point in time. I think it's more likely they're going to fall further behind before they start going up the pecking order anytime soon.
Yeah, especially the latest bunch of levers that happened last time out, it's definitely going to get worse before it gets better for Alpine, because obviously they need to go through a recruitment. Obviously, the senior management will need to obviously develop a plan and how they're actually going to combat it, but they need to go through a recruitment phase and actually have a plan on how to recover and develop the team. But as we know in Formula One, that takes time. And if you hire in a new, or even internal promotion, but you hire up an internal technical lead, you can't make changes that quickly to a car to bring on-track performance. So even you get those internal promotions in place, they're having the plan and then bring the parts to the track. That's going to be months down the line. If they're going to start now and they haven't got anyone, they haven't promoted their last or any filled the roles of the last 2 levers as of yet, and so it's potentially the year's already gone. Unfortunately for Alpine, and it's just really about, can they save 25?
Yeah, very true. I saw an article and I didn't click on it because I wasn't interested, and it said Alpine want to emulate McLaren's success with their latest changes, and it was basically Bruno Faman trying to draw comparisons between the two and trying to link it, and I just thought, no. I don't believe it. I'm not even going to bother reading the article because I just thought to myself, no, it's just ridiculous. I mean, it was like when Lauren Rossi was talking about in 2021, he was talking about Alpine. We should judge them in 2024 when we're expecting to be competing for podiums at almost every single race. Well, we're in 2024 now, and the only podium Alpine have any chance of competing for is the F2 one at this point in time. And so it's not looking good for them. Their merch is fantastic. I'll end on a positive note. It looks great. So, yeah, there you go. Lee, I think we should move on to the final part of the episode where we do the predictions. We changed it this year. We're not worried about trying to score points or anything like that. But we do some predictions for the best surprising team, the best surprising driver, the flop team, the flop driver, obviously race winner in the podium, and then I think we'll round it off there. So Lee, let's start off with the best surprise team and driver from you this weekend.
My best surprise driver, he's got to be Carlos. He showed last time out that he's got a bit between his teeth. He doesn't care about the inter-team dynamic anymore. He doesn't care about following orders. He just wants to go racing without any consequence. And obviously he wants to secure a seat. But he's just letting his natural talent flow and getting on with it last time out. And I think that's going to carry on. And he's got he's the driver that actually got apart from the obviously Max in the world title, he's got the most to lose because he could be out the sport. So he really wants to secure himself and stay where he deserves to be in the sport. So he's just going to drive his heart out, and I think he's going to be another standout performance this weekend.
Yeah, driver of the day last weekend. Certainly no reason why he can't do it this weekend.
24 races, Carlos Sainz, driver of the day.
That's it. Max has 24 wins, but does he have 24 driver of the days? That's where the real championship. Carlos will be the people's champion in that regard. So, maybe that's what F1 need to go for. Whoever gets most driver of the days is officially the people's champion. And that's a way to spice F1 up a little bit. That will get Max Verstappen trying to deliberately slow down a little bit to make it seem like he's trying harder to win a Grand Prix. That's how he's going to do it. So we've already figured out how to slow him down. We make the driver of the day an actual thing worth having. And as I'm sure it is, it's always nice to be acknowledged by fans in that regard. So my best surprise, I'm going with Lewis Hamilton. I think Bahrain was quite underwhelming by his lofty standards, and I think he's going to be determined to put that right, and I think he's going to be right up there this weekend for a podium, so I'm going to go with Lewis.
Yeah, I think I do agree. I think he had a bit of a messy weekend and just couldn't. It doesn't seem to be at balance with the car, so I definitely going to come back with a more on the attack Lewis.
Yeah. And there'll be plenty to learn from the car this weekend. They certainly wouldn't have figured it all out already by this point. So there's always rooms to be positive. Let's talk about our flop. Do we need to do a flop team, Lee?
So flop team, it's just going to be Alpine, unfortunately.
It's got to be Alpine. It's got to be
Alpine
Alpine.
land is closed, and they're no longer issuing any tickets to the land.
Yeah, fully. Yeah, no refunds allowed, I'm afraid. But
that's what they say to the celebrity new stakeholders they got last year.
Jeez, yeah, you forget about that. I mean, look, Anthony Joshua's fighting this weekend. I imagine if he doesn't win his fight, or if he does, I don't know if he's still going to be in a good mood or not. I don't think he's going to be pleased to look at his investment portfolio and see what Alpine are doing the next day after his fight. So, yeah, that will be interesting. Of course, Anthony and other stakeholders within there and investors like Ryan Reynolds, for example. I think Trent Alexander-Arnold as well, the Liverpool footballer. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to get their thoughts on what's going on. But, yeah, difficult times at Alpine. Let's do the flop driver. I'm not going to pick an Alpine driver because I think that's too easy. Probably a cheap shot at this point. I'm going to say Logan Sargent.
Oh, snap.
I mean, look, Logan, it's going to be a tough season for him. Didn't have much luck in Bahrain. He wasn't going around too badly before he had that issue with the car. But, yeah, I can't think of anyone else, to be honest, if I'm not picking an Alpine driver.
Yeah, say just because for an Alpine driver, for example, they can still have good drives in a rubbish car. But yeah, for Logan, I think he's still struggling with Formula One and getting the performance out of the car, I should say, not the Formula One. As you saw, he was the only one that really made a big mistake, or maybe mechanical related. They never actually said what caused him to go off the track in Bahrain, but it's just feels like he's still struggling at the start of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on now to our race winner and complete the podium, Lee. So I'll let you go first on this one.
Okay, so my race winner is going to be Max. That's hopefully a surprise for everybody here. And my pole, it would be Charles second and Carlos third.
I am going to almost agree with that. I'm going to go with Max first, Leclerc second, and Perez in P3. I think it's going to be another good weekend for Sergio Perez.
Red Bull sandwich.
Yeah, Red Bull sandwich with a bit Ferrari meat in the middle. So, but that's all we've got time for, guys. Let us know your thoughts and your predictions in the comment section if you're watching this on YouTube. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. And yeah, if you're listening on your favourite pod, don't forget to leave us... pole position. What, do you want to do pole position? I mean... Max?
I've gone Charles.
Oh, you've gone Charles. Look, okay. Well, that is definitely worth interrupting my outro, Lee. Yeah, absolutely. Loving that.
I said Charles last weekend, and I don't expect him to let me down this weekend. He set a time that was in Q2, admittedly, a time that was faster than Max's pole lap. So there was time in that car, if he could get the lap together, to get pole last time out. And I'm putting him to get pole this weekend, because he's got the performance there. He knows he can do it. He would have been annoyed at himself that he didn't replicate that in Q3. I think he'll get it this weekend. It's
a good shout. Yeah, I mean, if there's anyone that can, it's certainly him. And you're right, he should have been on pole in Bahrain, but he just didn't put it all together when it mattered most. But that's the difference, really. Max did. Simple as. But yeah, as I said already, guys, let us know your predictions. Leave us a 5-star review on your favourite pod platform. We will read them out if you do leave us one, and we hope that you can, because it really helps the show out a lot. But until next time, we'll be back for the review of the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. But until then, guys, please stay safe. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. And remember, as always, if you're not first, you're probably DNF1. Take care.
Goodbye.